Near a small village called Overstowe on the Quantock Hills in Somerset, England, you will find a prehistoric earthwork of unknown origin. It's a popular place for walkers and a hotspot for paranormal activity. What happened here? Join me as we discover the grisly history of Dead Woman's Ditch. Welcome, traveller. It's good to see you. This isn't a night to be wandering around outside. Come in, make yourself comfortable, and stay a while, and allow me to share a story with you. In the 1780s, in a hamlet called Bincombe near Overstowe, there lived a man named Jon Walford. He was a charcoal burner, a profession he inherited from his late father. The job entailed John living in a hut in the local forest 6 days a week. He was a highly regarded person, written about by the diarist Tom Poole, who had known him as a young boy, and even Wordsworth and Coleridge, who lived in the same village. Thomas Poole described Jon Walford as athletic, nimble and strong. He had a fine countenance, but certainly of the saturnine order, dark hair and eyebrows, dark sparkling eyes. He was a favourite of all, remarkable for good temper and generosity, but he possessed ardent feelings and strong passions. So, a popular man, hard-working and attractive. It was inevitable then that he would capture the attention of a local woman named Jane Shawnee, who would visit him often at the hut where he worked. Jane has been described as a poor, stupid creature, an ordinary squat person, disgustingly dirty and slovenly in her dress. Nevertheless, there must have been something about her that John found irresistible, as Jane fell pregnant with his child. As the child was born out of wedlock, John was taken into custody and was given the choice of marrying Jane or paying for the child's upkeep. Jane's parents stepped in and offered financial support for the child. Sometime after this, John met a lady named Anne Rice of Adscombe. They fell deeply in love and made plans to marry. With so much for them both to look forward to, the future looked good. But, as is sometimes the way with such things, fate had other plans, and a temptation presented itself to John. Jane Shawnee once again re-entered John's life. She was now the mother of 2 children, the second being fathered by John's brother, William. Jane fell pregnant again with John's second child. This time he had no choice but to break off the engagement with Anne and marry Jane. Anne went into service at nearby Stegursey, but John would still visit her whenever he could. Despite being responsible for his situation, John was bitter and unhappy with it, being married to Jane and losing Anne, the woman he allegedly loved. Thus, he agreed with her mother that Jane could only visit his rented cottage in the evening, not with the 2 children. The relationship between John and Jane was unsettled, to say the least. They were often heard and seen arguing. Jane would taunt him regularly about his former fiancée Anne, which would only provoke the situation further into a downward spiral. Indeed, within 10 days of their marriage, John was overheard in a local pub saying he was planning to leave for London, or he was going to murder his wife. 3 weeks after their wedding day, on the evening of the 4th of July 1789, John returned home to his cottage after having supper at a friend's house. Shortly after, Jane visits and states that she wishes to buy some cider from the local pub, the Castle of Comfort. Not wanting to make the journey on foot alone, John follows close behind her. Inevitably, the couple begins to argue. Something is said that causes John to finally snap. He strikes her, holds her by the throat and shakes her. He then grabs a post from a hedge and relentlessly beats Jane until she falls unconscious with a fractured skull. Not content with this, Jon pulls out his knife and slits Jane's throat. He decides to put her body in a nearby disused mine shaft. However, Jane is still heavily pregnant with their second child. She is not easy to move, so Jon drags her body into the ditch and covers her with branches and leaves. Despite his horrific, brutal actions, Jon arrives back home at around 12:30 a.m. and falls straight to sleep. A few hours later, in the early morning light, 2 children notice blood running out from under a gate and alert 2 men living nearby. Jane Walford's body is found in what is known as Dead Woman's Ditch, severely beaten with her throat cut. Jon's home was searched soon after this shocking discovery, which revealed a blood-stained knife and his breeches covered in blood, along with a pair of mud-stained stockings. Jon pleads innocence, stating that he didn't know of his wife's whereabouts and that she was most likely at her mother's, as she didn't come home last night. He realizes that his situation is past the point of no return, and he soon confesses to the murder. He stood trial on the 18th of August 1789, was found guilty, and was sentenced to death. Whilst in jail awaiting his fate, Jon tells his brother William that the devil got into my head. On Thursday, the 30th of August, Jon Walford, hands and feet in chains, is lifted onto a cart and taken to his place of execution. However, arriving at Nether Stowey, it's soon discovered that the gallows are not yet ready. So, Jon is brought to the Globe Inn, where the landlord gives him bread and ale. Local people came into the inn to see Jon, who raised a toast to them all and even shook hands with Thomas Poole, who had been a prosecution witness. With the gallows finally ready, Jon is put back on the cart. Suddenly, from out of the crowd runs a woman. It's Anne Rice, Jon's former fiancée, who is pregnant with their child. She climbs onto the cart to say goodbye to him. They try to kiss, but Jon is pulled away by an officer. Eventually, the cart arrives beneath the gallows on Danesborough Hill. Jon joined in with the vicar for the Lord's Prayer and told the crowd that he was guilty and hoped that God and the world would forgive him. Finally, with the noose around his neck and his head covered, accepting his fate, Jon Walford dropped the handkerchief he had been given to signal he was ready. He was hung for 20 minutes. Afterwards, his corpse was taken down, locked into an iron cage, and raised to the top of the gibbet. The gibbet happened to be a quarter of a mile from Jon's parents' house and directly opposite it. So for the next year, every time his parents left their house, they were greeted by the horrific sight of their son's decaying body hanging on the hill. Legend tells that the cage that held him finally fell a year and a day after his death. He was buried directly underneath where the cage fell by sympathetic locals. During this time, Anne gave birth to a daughter, who she named Sarah, in November 1789. Anne died a few months after, in February 1790. Naturally, people claim this area is now a haven for paranormal activity. If you walk near to the place of Jon Walford's gibbet, it is said that you can hear his ghostly footsteps. Some have seen a spectre of a man walking his ghoulish dogs. Others say they have heard a disembodied voice that says hello close to their ears when no one else is around. A ghostly lady in white, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, has also been seen in the same place. Many believe it is the restless spirit of Jane Walford. An interesting addendum to this account is that it has always been believed that it was Jane's murder that gave the name to Dead Woman's Ditch, but it is now thought that she was discovered near a turnpike. It's been revealed that the name of the ditch can be found on a map published in 1782, 7 years before the gruesome event that unfolded. So what happened in 1782? Did another heinous crime take place? Not so according to some sources. Dead Woman's Ditch is merely a traditional name for prehistoric earthworks. Perhaps if a less macabre name had been assigned to this place, the fates would not have been so cruel. Their hand need not be forced or tempted more than necessary. But how quickly and radically a person's life can change according to their choices. The destiny that plays out in the wake of these decisions can only be surrendered to and accepted. I see that our time has ended. I appreciate your company and for listening to my tale. I hope you will return, as I have many more stories for you. In the meantime, farewell and safe travels.